Church family, thanks so much for praying with us. There are some hearts that are really hurting, not only here in this church, but all across our state, all across our country, all across the world. Don't forget about the life that's being lost right now, the questions being asked, the thing, I obviously have little kids in my home, so that's all I'm reflecting on, and the videos of things happening and little kids screaming, and that just rocks me to my core, right, as a parent. Adeline just had tubes put in her ear, and we were terrified for that, right? So let alone something like this going on, lest we forget that situation could be us in a heartbeat, right? Let's just put ourselves there, not out of any political conversation, but out of humanity caring for humanity and humanity weeping with those who are weeping. We could be there in a heartbeat. So let's keep praying for that. Thank you so much, church family. Well, we're moving back into our 10 Commandment series. Once again, this is a little bit of a transition, so just kind of make the little hurdle with me, and we'll move on and chuckle about it a little bit as we go, okay? So let me ask you a question. What do you prefer? I already know Doug's answer. What do you prefer, fast or slow? Fast or slow? I heard Mark, yeah? Fast or slow? The one, Mark and I last year, we were out on a snow machine trail, and all of a sudden a wolf came out of the trail, and the one thing Mark was really upset about was that his sled was in eco mode, not sport mode. It wasn't fast enough because he wanted to pin that wolf and knock it right off the trail. Fast or slow? Talk to me. Fast, right? Most of us do. Most of us prefer fast. Let me phrase that question another way. You have a quick question for a friend, millennials and under. Do you text or do you call? Don't ever call me, okay? Please don't call me. Just text me, okay? I'll respond so much faster. That's somewhat joking and an awful lot serious. But another question. How many of you go to Blockbuster or Redbox or Netflix? Right? Blockbuster, what's Blockbuster? What's Redbox, right? Netflix, right? There's a fastness to that. Would you rather drive a 1970 AMC Gremlin or a 1970 Camaro Z28? No, you're a liar. Who said that? You're a liar. Those things are gross. It's the weirdest car ever made. You've been working all day. The house is a mess. You're on your way home to pick up your kids and release the sitter. Do you go home and put something in the oven, or do you swing through McDonald's on your way home? Maybe not McDonald's. Fill in your fast food of choice, right? T-Boo, you know what I'm saying? Come on. When service is bad at a restaurant, oftentimes we call it slow, right? What agitates us the most about technology? When it doesn't, I can't use it. I'm sorry, this isn't what you said, but all I heard was like, I'm old and I don't understand how to use it. That's not what you said. That's what I heard. How about that loading symbol, right? That loading symbol of death. You're sitting there waiting to watch The Office for the 100th time through, and it's loading. You know exactly what's going to happen, but it's loading and you can't watch it, and it's slow, right? It's killing you. When someone's a little behind the ball at work, they can't seem to get it together, what do we say? We say, I'm sorry, David is just a little slow. You got to get used to David. That's just who he is back there in the sound booth, right? There's no way around the fact, and it's no secret, that in our fast-paced, success-driven culture, more often than not, fast equals good and slow equals bad. That has had some really interesting anthropological and societal effects, not only in our lives, but in our culture as a whole. It's this that has led to efficiency being more important than quality. If the job is done fast, it's necessarily better than the quality of the job. It's led to skills and gifting being more important than character, integrity, and purity. Is the job done? It's led to the job being more important than the people involved in the job, right? You tracking with me? Remember the statistics we talked about a couple weeks ago. It's led to those exact same things, that the average American only has 4 hours and 26 minutes per week to themselves to do what they want to do. That's the busyness of our culture. The average American ends each week with 20 things left on the to-do list. To me, that seems like a low number, right? It's a lot more than 20 things on our list. So let me ask 2 questions. First, what do we do with this reality? What do we do with this reality? How do we embrace it? And secondly, does God have anything to say about this seemingly unavoidable aspect of modern day life? The pace of modernity. Well, today we're jumping into week 4 of our 10 Commandments series, a series where we're intentionally looking at a set of laws that God gave the nation of Israel, thinking all the way back to week 1. God gave these laws to the nation of Israel so that they would be, quote unquote, set apart, so that they would be different, and they, as a nation, would lead the whole world back to the garden reality, a place of flourishing. And what we're also intentionally doing in this series is taking these laws, taking these commandments, and seeing what they mean for us. Well, interestingly enough, the commandment we overlook most, the one we're looking at today, potentially is the one that could perhaps be most influential, could be most life-changing, life-altering for our lives. Let's look at it together. Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. Exodus 20, 8 through 11. Let me see if I can even find it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Moving forward with our 3-question outline that we've worked with the past couple of weeks. 3 questions. What is our commandment all about? Why is it so important? And thirdly, how did Jesus live it out? So let's go with question number 1. What is this commandment all about? What is this commandment all about? Musicians in the room, raise your hand. If you're a musician, let me see. Sue, why is your hand not up? Oh, it is. All right. I'm sorry. What's going on? Answer me this. How important is rhythm? Critical? Is that what you said? Can someone be up on stage, a part of our worship team, if they don't have rhythm? Maybe we haven't talked about our thoughts on that. Yeah. We like quality worship, don't we? Right? We like rhythm, right? Famous composer John Williams, he composed all the Star Wars music. He says this: rhythm functions as the propulsive engine of a piece of music. It gives the composition structure. Every notable composition contains a section purely focused on rhythm. Without it, there is no backbone to the composition. It's important, right? That's what that means. It's important. It's critical. What about the rhythm of life? It's an interesting question. We're on this word rhythm. What about this rhythm of life, or this pace of life? I have a watch on, right? And it's clicking to a what? A rhythm. It's clicking to a rhythm. You put your fingers on your wrist, and what do you feel? Feel your pulse, which is a what? A rhythm. You see a rhythm that represents the earth spinning. It represents the earth circling around the sun. It represents the earth setting and the earth, or the sun setting and the sun rising. It represents a rhythm that determines days and evenings and seasons. A rhythm we feel beating in our chest every single day. You see, rhythm was established when God started the ticking timeline of creation. God said, "Let there be," and then all of a sudden we heard tick, 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 and a rhythm started, right? Let me ask you a question. What happens when our heart jumps out of rhythm? What happens? Joe, what happens? Something has to be done to shock it right back into beat, right? Or else your whole body is affected. It's not just the heart that's affected, your whole body, every bone, every muscle, every whatever other word you want to say is affected by your heart being out of rhythm. In Genesis 1, we read phrases like, there was evening and there was morning. You see, it's the start of this new rhythm. We read things like, and a great light, the sun, to rule the day, and a great light, the moon, to rule the night. That's rhythm. All of a sudden, a pace, a structure was put in place. And then it says, so God blessed the 7th day and called it holy because he rested from his work. That's rhythm. It's a new pace, setting a pattern. As we've already said, when our heart jumps out of rhythm, something has to shock it back into place so our whole body is affected. All of a sudden, we're beginning to see the importance of this thing called rhythm, not only in our daily lives, but all the way back from the beginning. Not only did God create, but he created a pattern, created a timeline, and created rhythm. You see, in creation, God started a rhythm. And in the garden, God brought humanity into a rhythm. He started this thing, and then he created us and said, I want you to experience this thing, this pace of life that I have created. A rhythm of partnership, a rhythm of grace, a rhythm of love, of mission, of peace, and this word that we love but don't often experience, rest. A rhythm of rest and margin. As we've talked a lot about, just like a heart beating out of sync, humanity chose self over partnership with God, right? The rhythm of creation is humanity resting in God, or as it says in John, abiding in the vine, co-creating, co-cultivating, bringing this world into a place of human flourishing, right? We've talked a lot about that. When humanity decided to choose self over partnership with God, all of a sudden, they broke the rhythm, and they went out of sync. Like a car with 3 round wheels and 1 square one, so became humanity, limping along the timeline. What's so fascinating is when we are aligned, we've all had these seasons in our life, hopefully, when we are aligned with the rhythm of God, things just seem to flow perfectly, don't they? Things just seem to work. Your prayers are being answered. You're not yelling at your kids. You're loving on your wife or your spouse all the time. Things are just working. But as soon as we break out of sync, what was meant to flow, what was meant to move smoothly, what was just supposed to happen naturally or organically, all of a sudden becomes a little lopsided and it feels a little strange. Let me give an example. If I would have started praying with Cricket as soon as we started dating in high school, it wouldn't feel as weird as it does now to try to pray with my wife. Do you understand what I'm saying? If I would have embraced the rhythm or the system of God, of doing things when I was supposed to, when the time came, if we met in high school, I was a sophomore, you were a freshman. If we would have started praying together instead of doing the things we did, we wouldn't have been lopsided. We wouldn't be experiencing awkwardness and journeying spiritually together now because it would be normal. It would be organic. It would be natural. So to answer the question as plainly as possible, what is the Sabbath command all about? I know this has been maybe a little bit deep and a little bit confusing, but the Sabbath command is all about God calling his children back to the ideal rhythm, back to the ideal pace, the ideal rhythm that leads his children to ultimate human flourishing. You see, the creation story introduces us to the idea of Sabbath rest, something God built into the rhythm of creation itself. Our human reality is prone to restlessness, isn't it? Isn't it? Where are my success-driven people in the room? My workaholics. It's not even gonna, okay. We're prone to that reality, right? We're prone to restlessness. We're prone to worrying about what's going on in our jobs or what's going on in people's perception of us and all those things. And over the years, we've only gotten worse at the interplay between work and rest or work and play. And here's the catch. We don't set the rhythm. We often like to try to adjust to the rhythm, to speed things up, or certainly not to slow things down. It's always to speed things up. We don't get to set the rhythm. God set the rhythm in Genesis chapter 1. And it's our job to find the beat and attach ourselves to it. Are you tracking with me at all on this? A little bit at least? It's our job to find that rhythm and attach ourselves to it. You see, God included this law for the nation of Israel in order to bring them back to the life-giving rhythm of the garden design. Rest, work, play, partnership, and intimacy with God. It's not simply designating a day as quote-unquote holy as much as it's calling us back to a garden lifestyle. Not just a day, but a lifestyle. We'll get more into that in a moment. You see, it's all about rhythm. Secondly, why is this command so important? Why is this command so important? Well, to state the obvious, because it's God's ideal. It's God's ideal. I've asked you this question a couple times. I want to just do it again. Do we all agree that God created everything? Do we all agree that God is the master builder, that he's the one behind the starting of the timeline, the creation of the earth, the creation of you and me and all of the animals? Yeah, we're there? Okay. Do we all believe that he is good? That can sometimes be a little bit harder of a question, right? Especially with what's going on in the world right now. We're not trying to just avoid that, but can we force ourselves sometimes in the hardest seasons to believe that God is good? So if we believe those two things in tandem, then isn't it fair to say that he knows what's best for our lives? That his rhythm, his pace is probably the thing that will be best for us as we journey on this rock for however long we're here, right? Yeah. Well, God first modeled this balance and then he called people to it. You see, I believe the Sabbath lifestyle is God's ideal because it provides two things. Number one, rest in God. Rest in God. One of the most beautiful Old Testament Sabbath examples wraps itself around the story of Israel's exodus, or Israel's exit from captivity in Egypt. You remember they're wandering around the desert, right? They just have some amazing God experiences where they see these plagues, they see God move, then they come to an ocean and they see God part it, and they march through this ocean, and then they turn around and see it collapse on their enemies, right? They see these amazing God experiences, but it doesn't stop there. God is bringing forth water. God is leading them physically by a cloud and by a pillar of fire, but what are they eating? What are they eating? Manna, which is what? Modern day potato chips, there you go. Yeah, manna, this special bread that God would rain or bring like dew on the grass every morning, and they were charged to go out every morning and collect what they needed for the day. But what was the Sabbath challenge? What was the Sabbath command wrapped around the manna? Does anyone know? Say it again, I think someone got there. Not to collect more than you needed. To go and collect what you needed for that day, and to not even think about tomorrow. Man, that'll preach all in itself, won't it? You see, the rest in God is our challenge to not take more than what we need for today. There's enough worry in our day today. Why are we worrying about what's going on tomorrow, right? In other words, to trust in God for tomorrow. This rest in God even applies to our work that we all know will just blow up if we don't show up, right? If I'm not at work, it's going to fail right away. That's our belief. But this Sabbath rest challenges us to let go of that. Look at Exodus chapter 34, verse 21. It says this, even during the plowing and harvest season, you must rest. That's God talking to the nation of Israel. Even during tax season, you must rest, right? Even during prime snow machine season, you must maybe not do that and spend time with your wife and rest, right? It's probably the most heretical thing that's ever come out of my mouth. Even during the plowing and harvest season, you must rest. You see, Sabbath living forces us to remember that we're not God. As much as we think we're the rhythm setter of our lives and rhythm setter of our pace of life and of our work and of our family, we're not God. We can't do it all, and we need to trust him for our lives and for our tomorrows. That's rest in God. Secondly, there's nothing worse than being off rhythm. Everyone knows the person who just can't clap on beat, right? Right? If you're not laughing at that, it's probably you because you don't understand what I'm talking about. We all know those people. Let me ask you kind of a real question. How many of you have ever yelled at your spouse for the dumbest reason? But you're so prideful, I don't have this in my notes, but you're so prideful you're never admit it, but you go back to your room in the evening, you're like, darn it. While at the same time coming up with more arguments to prove your point, right? We've all yelled at our spouse for the dumbest reason, haven't we? That's being off rhythm. How many of you have had a bad day at work? That becomes the priority. You bring it home with you and you start yelling at your kids. Your kids are excited to do some Play-Doh with you and they put the wrong color in the wrong cup or they mix the colors in the same cup. Oh, that'll do it. And it ticks you right off, right? That's off rhythm. How many of you have ever ignored the pull towards an act of generosity because, well, there might be a world war in the mix? And we want to make sure to conserve everything we have and hold on tight to it. See, that's being off rhythm. That's not trusting the Lord for tomorrow and not resting in him. You know, while journeying with Jesus, the disciples often ignored the call of Sabbath living and became quite out of sync with Jesus. John chapter 4 is a pretty profound example of this. Don't read ahead yet, but I know you will anyway because I see you doing it right now. This is a moment in the story of Jesus and the disciples where they're on a journey. Jesus knows where he has to be, and he tells his disciples, instead of taking the short way, which is actually going around the city of Samaria, he says, let's take the long way. Let's go the way that we as Jews are not supposed to go, because Samaritans and Jews has this big racist thing going on in the mix that we don't even really fully understand. But Jesus says, instead, let's go through. Let's just see what happens and go through, just like Jesus did so many times. And we come upon this scene in John chapter 4. John chapter 4. Now, this is after Jesus had already engaged in a conversation with this woman who was at the well, right? Jesus and his disciples come up to this well. Jesus is thirsty like any of us would be wandering through the desert. His disciples take off for food. No one really knows where they went. They just kind of disappeared looking for food. And Jesus is alone at a well with this woman having a conversation. And if you read the whole story, you'll find out that he reveals that he knows everything about her life. He says, in fact, you don't have a husband. You've had 5, and now you're sleeping with someone who's not your husband. And she's shocked, interested, and terrified all at the same time. Like, what in the world is going on? And so this woman runs back to her village and tells everybody what's going on, and then eventually brings the whole village back. And this is where we find our story. John chapter 4, verses 27 to 35. The disciples meander back, and it says this. Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, what do you seek, or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ or the Messiah? They went out of the town and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, teacher or rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. In other words, I have food that you keep missing because you do not understand what I'm all about. Verse 33, so the disciples said to one another, this is so human, it's beautiful. Has anyone brought him something to eat? Like, what is he talking about? Food that we don't know about. Like, can we have some? Why'd we go over there if you have some here? 34, Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Can you almost sense the sarcastic frustration with Jesus in that story? Jesus and the disciples roll up to this scene. They roll up to the well, and what do they see? What does Jesus see in this situation? What does Jesus see? He sees a person, right? Yeah. He sees a soul. He sees mission. He sees opportunity. He sees soil ready to be harvested. He saw a soul deeply in need of what only he had to offer and what his disciples were supposed to see. But what did the disciples see? What did the disciples see? Well, the disciples left to find food. They were too busy to interact. They missed the harvest, and they couldn't figure out what in the world Jesus was talking about. Look at it again, John chapter 4, verses 31 to 34. John 4, 31 to 34. I shouldn't have closed it. I'm sorry. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, teacher, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you don't know about. So the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? Jesus said to him, my food is to do the will of him who sent me to accomplish his work. In other words, what fuels me is the mission of God. Not work, not 9 to 5, not McDonald's, not Taco Bell. What fuels me is doing the mission that God has called me to be. Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. So why is this command so important? Well, first, because it gives us the restful pace of life that we all need. It gives us a moment to breathe. It gives us margin. It gives us areas of grace and space in our life, which we all need. But second, Because without the Sabbath lifestyle, we'll be distracted by temporary needs, i.e., I'm hungry. I don't have time to talk to this woman. I'm going to move on and go find my food. Hopefully she's not here when I come back because that should just be a little bit awkward, right? We get distracted by temporary needs and a busy life and altogether do just as the disciples did in this story. They missed the harvest. They missed the harvest. They had no clue who Jesus was talking to. They had no clue why Jesus was talking to this woman. All they saw was their hunger and the racial tensions that were in the room at the moment. You see, we talk about foreness all the time. How often, even in our foreness, are our lives so busy where we miss the greatest act of foreness, which is digging into life with someone else, right? Our final question, how did Jesus live it out? What were some of the topics of Jesus' teachings during the Sermon on the Mount? Throw them out there. I know some of you know them. What did Jesus teach during the Sermon on the Mount? Love your enemies. What else? Say that again. Salt and light, yeah. What else? Mercy. He said things like, you have heard, do not, what? Do not murder. What else? Do not commit adultery. And then the third one he talked about is do not what? Come on, Dan. I just did something that I pray no preacher ever does to me, so. I know. In about a month, right? It'll happen, yeah. Divorce. He says, do not divorce. And he introduces these three topics. And what did he do with these topics? What did he do with them? Yeah, so in other words, he took them almost a step further, right? He profoundly brought a newness that moved many aspects of do's and don'ts, just like Doug said, of the law, to actually reveal the heartbeat of what was behind the law. He went beyond the do's and don'ts to the heart beyond. So murder moved to what? Hatred and anger. In other words, I want you to have compassion on people. Adultery moved to what? Lustful thoughts. In other words, I want you to be committed and I want you to be loyal and I want you to have faithfulness. Any divorce, which by the way, contextually, in that season, a man could divorce his wife for any reason, no context needed, no conversation at all. It was, she burnt the manna or whatever it was, so we're done, right? You could just move on at that point. So Jesus took it a step further and went from any divorce and saying, please don't. Please don't. Please work towards commitment. Please work towards reconciliation. Please work towards faithfulness and loyalty. Do you see the pattern? Moving it from the law to the heartbeat beyond the law. Well, with how Jesus embodied a Sabbath lifestyle reveals that he honestly and really interestingly did the exact same thing with this law of Sabbath. He took a law that said take one day out of 7 and make it holy, and he moved it to a lifestyle of contemplation, a lifestyle of restfulness, a lifestyle of rhythm, and a lifestyle of margin. You see, all of a sudden it became more than just a day marked as quote unquote holy. It became an attitude of worship that we're called to live every single day of our lives with, week in and week out. An attitude that truly believes, like we talked about over and over again in our Experiencing God series, an attitude that truly believes every moment has sacred potential. That's why Jesus invested in the woman at the well. Every moment, every conversation has sacred potential. That's exactly why the disciples forgot and went to find their meal, is because they weren't paying attention to those things. You see, it's why Jesus proved to move against every racial and cultural stereotype when he went through Samaria. We already talked about the racism there. Sat at a well with a woman by himself. That is a big cultural no-no at that time. And talked to her as a man to a woman, as a Jew to a Samaritan. This blew up her mind in the story, and it totally changed her perspective of Jesus. Not only did the Sabbath lifestyle lead to Jesus teaching the disciples and pointing this woman towards flourishing, but look what else happened. John chapter 4, verses 41 verses 40 to 41. John 4, 40 to 41. So when the Samaritans came to him, this is after the woman ran back to her town and said, listen to what this guy told me. Then the whole village, the whole town came rushing back to see what was going on. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days, and what happened? Many more believed. Many more believed. How long was the ministry of the Savior, of the God-man? How long was it? 3 years. 3 years. In a matter of 3 years, time matters, doesn't it? If you're God and you become human and you start walking on earth in human form, you think you're going to make every single second count. And all of a sudden, on a whim, this community says, hey, Jesus, can you hang out with us for a little bit? We want to hear more. What does Jesus do? He stays there 2 days longer. Gives of his time, gives of the other things he could be doing, gives of the reason they were going through Samaria in the first place, to sit there with these people, to be with them, to be present. Another example wraps around the story of Lazarus. How many of you know the story of Lazarus? John chapter 11. Go there with me. It opens up like this. John chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. You kind of sense the whoa, wait a minute. Do you see the two phrases that almost contradict each other in that sentence? It says, now Jesus loved Lazarus, so he waited. Lazarus was very ill on his deathbed. Jesus loved him, so he didn't go right away and took his time. That's really interesting. Continuing in the story, John chapter 11, verses 17 to 21. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been dead in the tomb 4 days. This is right when Jesus finally got around to coming to see Lazarus. He had already been dead in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Mary heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. It's kind of a bold statement, isn't it? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. How many times in your lifestyle do people put expectations on you? How many times in your lifestyle and your rhythm does your job put certain expectations, certain pressures on you? How many times in your lifestyle and your rhythm, in your pattern of life, do your hobbies try to pull you away from family time or from time alone with your spouse or whatever it may be, things that are of priority? Number one, you see the Sabbath lifestyle modeled by Jesus helps us hear what matters most. If Jesus was a people pleaser, this statement would have rocked his world. Jesus, you didn't do all that you could have. If you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Continuing in the story, John 11, 32 to 35. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And then one of the most powerful phrases in all of our scripture, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Let me ask you really practically, do you think Jesus knew what he was going to do next in this story? Do you think Jesus knew? All the way back at the beginning, he said this isn't going to lead to death, right? So he kind of knew what was going on and was attuned to the will of God or the rhythm of God in this whole story. Why in the world does the God-man who sees everything, who knows his power, what he's about to do, why does he take a moment and weep? Why? He's human. He was resting in the emotions of the people around him. Right? That's the Sabbath lifestyle. It's not hurry up and get the job done so that everyone feels better. So often that's my pressure. Hurry up, let me do what I need to do, and then everybody will stop worrying, we'll just solve the problems. But Jesus modeled something different, a slowness, a waiting that reveals his love, his deep care, that he is willing, even as the God-man, to weep with those who are weeping, to sit and to wait and to sulk in that moment. And then, of course, the story concludes, John 11:43-44. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." You see, Sabbath living isn't about ignoring responsibilities. It's not about shoving what you're supposed to do on someone else. It's not about pushing it off. It's not about being lazy. It's about taking a moment to think. It's about living with the reality that every single moment has sacred potential, and I don't want to let a moment go by without taking a moment to think and to see what God would have me do in this situation. Giving every moment the attention it deserves. Can I share one more? Do we have time? Ooh, we're a little late. Can I share one more? We're all right? Share one more Jesus example with you. Matthew. I should ask Emily. Is she in the room? She says no. I don't know what to do in that situation. Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verses 36-46, they say this. Then Jesus went with them to the place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And talking with them, Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful, and he began to be troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. Remain here and watch with me." In other words, be awake with me, be attentive with me, watch what I'm doing. Verse 39. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." This is Jesus asking God to remove the cross from his future. That's the context here. And when he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me for 1 hour? You couldn't pray with me for 1 hour before falling asleep? Watch and pray that you may not enter temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but your flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Okay, finally, go sleep. Take your rest. See, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. My betrayer is at hand." How many of you experience stress? How many of you experience fear? Anxiety? Overwhelming? Your mind is just rocked with a sense of being overwhelmed. You there ever? How about sorrow? You ever deeply troubled with sorrow and grief? Of course. What do you run to in those moments? What do you run to? You run to work? Do you run to hobbies? Do you run to addiction? Do you run to some sort of distressor, like just going out to the garage, having a beer or smoking a cigar, right? What do you run to in those moments? You see, as Jesus personified, the Sabbath lifestyle will have us excitedly running to the Father when we're in those moments of distress. When we're in those moments of fear, worry, anxiety, concern, we will run to intimacy with our God, and it will have us so in love with the intimacy we experience with him that we will be greatly frustrated in the fact that other people don't get it. That other people are missing out on the opportunity to converse with God himself because they're weary, they're tired, their lives are out of sync, their lives are out of rhythm. Jan Peterson, wife of the late Eugene Peterson. Eugene Peterson wrote over 30 Christian living books. He penned the translation or the paraphrase of the Bible called The Message. You've probably heard of him. She says this, then we'll wrap up. She says this: "Evening dinners with Eugene were a true love story. His attention fully fixed on me and our relationship, talking about memories cherished and dreams lived. It was also during these evenings that I most saw his attention to our Father. More times than I can count, as if Eugene heard God audibly calling him, he would pause in the middle of our conversation, walk to the sunroom, which looked directly at Flathead Lake, fall to his knees for 10 minutes, then come back, finish our meal, and finish our conversation. Now, some of you spouses would be like, hey, no, come back. Come back to me. Where are you going? Right? It's a little weird. Church, man, isn't that attentiveness to our God? Isn't that listening to his voice? Isn't that having a slowness of life where we're just able, even amidst our busyness, to hear him call us? To hear him call us, to hear him want to talk to us. So what is this commandment all about? Well, it's all about God calling his people back to the rhythm of the garden, a rhythm that leads to ultimate human flourishing. Why is it important? Because we have thousands of things fighting for our time, energy, attention, and priority at all times, right? We're always distracted. We're always busy. And without a Sabbath lifestyle, we will not enjoy the rest that's capable in him, and we'll miss the harvest, our biggest opportunities to speak Jesus into someone else's life. Looking at our Matsu challenge this morning, I got two things for you. Number one, we didn't spend a whole lot on this topic, so I want to emphasize it now. Take a day. Number one, take a day. Really practical question. Jesus moved murder to anger and hatred. Does that mean murder is now okay? What? You guys don't answer that question? Yeah, well, maybe sometime. Obviously not, right? Jesus moved adultery to lust. Does that all of a sudden now mean that adultery is okay? Obviously not, right? In the same way, Jesus moved beyond the 1 in 7 principle, but that doesn't make it a bad thing. My encouragement to you is to take a day. Most pastors and leaders would encourage you the same. Take one day a week to focus on rest, worship, family, and love. Let me tell you, I am so bad at this. I saw my wife's eyes right now, so I needed to say that. I'm so bad at this, okay? It doesn't mean I have it all figured out or it's all perfect, but take a day to focus on family, rest, love. You'll be amazed at what comes out of it. You'll be amazed at how your familial relationships will flourish and how you'll start to experience a newfound mental peace. Number one, take a day. Secondly, embrace the Sabbath lifestyle. Embrace the Sabbath lifestyle. When you go home today, look at your schedule and find daily rest. Find daily margin, meaning one meeting can't end at 1 and the next meeting can't start at 1. Create margin in your schedule so that you're not overworked, so that you're not overburdened, so that you're not overstressed and come home worn out and whooped. One of the most important practices of Jesus was finding rest and making time for getting back on rhythm. You see, the human condition is prone to restlessness, and our digital age only makes that exponentially worse, right? We must model the restfulness of Jesus, which is more than just a day, but is a spirit we all live by every single day of the week. You track with me on that? So our plan this morning was to have me pray and then step into worship. I'm going to make the executive call here. I'm just going to pray, and then we'll call it good this morning. Does that sound good with you guys? Does that work? Okay, we went a little over. I don't want to over-worry Emily's workers over there next door. Jesus, thank you so much for embodying what it means to live in a life that's filled with rest. Live in a life that isn't over-worried about pressures and burdens and stress. Lord, help us rest in you. Lord, so many of our fears are things you've already defeated, things you've already conquered, things you have already stated authority on. Help us believe that. Lord, it's amazing how much rest we can experience when we truly believe that you have this whole world in your hands, that you're sovereign over everything that's happening, and secondly, that you truly are good. So, Lord, would you shift our perspective today? But God, I also pray that you would shift our priorities in our life, and I'm praying for myself here. Lord, help us remember the importance of family. Help us remember the importance of our spouses, of our kids, not just work. Lord, help us remember the importance of intimacy or alone time with you, Father. And help us hear your voice when you call. Jesus, we love you so much, and I just pray a blessing over everyone in this room that you would breathe your rest, breathe your peace, you breathe your grace here today. Pray these things in your name. Amen.